Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Chapter 16, Civil War. What happened, why it happened, when it happened. All right, here's what you need to know. Here's your review for your final assessment. What are some of the causes of the Civil War? Well, first cause, slavery. What was the future of slavery? The economy and the livelihood of the South depended on it, so they were going to fight for it, so they did. They went to war for it. So slavery is going to be the number one issue on the table. I don't care what anybody says. That's what it was fought over. The economy, livelihood of the South depended on slavery, and they wanted to keep it. So that's cause number one. The Dred Scott decision. Remember the Dred Scott decision that we talked about last chapter? Besides denying citizenship for African Americans, it also overturned the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had restricted slavery in certain U.S. territories. Look, a basis of slavery. 1, 2. Next thing, states' rights. Remember we were talking about states' rights? Rights refers to the struggle between the federal government and individual states over political power. Again, what do you think the basis is? Slavery. 3 for 3. Number 4, the Missouri Compromise, Kansas-Nebraska Act, and Bleeding Kansas. Again, the basis of slavery causes pro and anti-slavery forces to continue to battle against each other. This is where John Brown, the martyr/terrorist, would be included. And finally, you have the election of Abraham Lincoln. The Southerners felt that Republicans like Lincoln would abolish slavery, even though Lincoln said that he would not take away slavery where it existed, but he will make it so that slavery couldn't spread. The Southerners felt that that wasn't a good answer. So what do? They secede after the election of 1860. So we have a war. South Carolina secedes, then 6 others, then 4 others, and we have the Confederate States of America against the United States of America. And in this chapter, we went over some strengths and weaknesses of the North, or the Union, versus the South, or the Confederacy. So we said some advantages of the Union, the North. They had a lot more banking, more factories, more ships, which means they were able to build more weapons, more clothes. They had more money to fight this war. They had a bigger navy to be able to try to choke the southern states out. They had more railroads, more to move these supplies, to move the men, to move the equipment. Out of roughly 30,000 miles of railroad, about 22,000 miles of it were in the North, leaving only 8,000 in the South. The North had a much more experienced government. Remember, the North, New York City, Philadelphia, those areas right there, they were the basis of our government for a long time. Yes, correct. It does move to Washington, D.C. Correct. That is considered to be like part of the South, according to Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, but it's still part of the North. Okay, so they had a more experienced government. The South, the Confederacy, brand new government led by brand new people down there. And the North had a larger population. Look at that difference, 22 million to 9 million. That means you can lose a lot more men in this war. The disadvantages of the North, well, they were not as into it as the South. The South were the ones fighting for something. They were the ones fighting for their slaves. They were the ones fighting for their states' rights. They were the ones trying to fight for their economy, trying to fight for their livelihood. The Northerners were kind of just like, Lincoln wants to keep the Union together. Oh well. They were not in complete agreement over the abolition of slavery. That means not 100% of the Northerners wanted to abolish the slavery, even though a good number of it did. But, it wasn't in full agreement. And they lost most of their good military officers to the South, because most of the good military officers came from the state of Virginia, like Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was actually asked by by Lincoln to help lead the Northern Army, and Robert E. Lee said no, he would rather lead his state of Virginia than lead the nation of the United States. So a lot of those military officers like Robert E. Lee, Longstreet, Pickett, they were all from the South. So the North had a weaker generalhood, I guess you could call it. So the Confederacy, they had some advantages too. They had a trading relationship with Europe, specifically Britain and France. A lot of our cheap cotton left here and went to Britain and France in order for them to make goods. So they wanted to make sure they kept that trade relationship open with Europe. They had the best military officers, like Robert E. Lee. They had a long coastline. We have a long coastline in the South, making a blockade very difficult. The Southerners felt that they were right. They felt like fighting for their lives and their economy and for slavery was the right thing to do, and they were fighting for it on their soil, right? They were fighting for it on their land. They didn't have to go to the North. Remember, Robert E. Lee only went to the North twice and got beat twice. He wanted to sit there and fight this defensive war. That's what they were doing, fighting a defensive war. And British and French leaders sympathized with them due to their economic reasons, meaning the South did not have an economy, did not have the banking, the factory like the Northerners did. They were a lot poorer, I guess you could say, than the North. Okay, so they had those advantages, especially the biggest one, excuse me, is the fact that it was a defensive war. They literally had to just fight to defend their homeland until the Union Army just tired out and gave up and left. And as we know, that didn't happen. Some disadvantages that they definitely had that smaller Navy. Now, they did have some fast little boats, some blockade runners that were able to escape out, but really their smaller Navy was a disadvantage against the Union blockade. The long coastline, even though it was an advantage, it is still a disadvantage because we had to try to defend that. Right? Southern slaves, a large part of the population, were no help, right? Out of this 9 million Southerners, about 4 to 4.5 million were slaves. And if you weren't going to let your slaves fight, that means you're down to like 4.5 million to fight. Okay, so that was a big disadvantage. There was little industry, little factory production. So yeah, they had raw cotton, but they sure didn't have uniforms for it. They were able to feed their soldiers a lot better than the Union soldiers. But the problem is, with only 8,000 miles of railroad compared to the 22,000 miles in the North, they could not get it anywhere, right? So those are your advantages and disadvantages of the North versus South. The North is about economy, railroads, more people, doing all these things. And the South just wasn't. And the North had a lot more people to lose than the South, right? So those are your advantages and your disadvantages. And then we get into your important battles. We covered this before. First battle of the war. Remember what I said. You want to know the first, the turning point, the last. You're probably going to want to know the important ones on the Mississippi because that's the western frontier. You're going to want to know the ones that happened in our backyard, probably the deadliest one, the one that led to Lincoln's emancipation. So here we go. Fort Sumter, the first battle between the United States and the Confederate forces. All right. This was showing that the South was ready to fight. Right? So Lincoln needed the South to strike first, and here's where they do in Fort Sumter, April of 1861. The first big battle, another Confederate victory, was the Battle of Bull Run in July of 1861. The first major battle. Remember, not the first battle. This is the first major battle showing the Americans that this was not going to be a quick war, that the South was going to do whatever they had to do to fight. These are the ones where your casualties start stacking up, 3,000 to about 1,800. All right, so that's the first Battle of Bull Run, major battle of the war, the first major battle. The next one I want you to know about is the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. This is the single bloodiest day of battle in the whole war. 23,000 casualties in one battle, in one day's battle. The Union does wind up winning this. Lincoln starts replacing his generals at this one. And it's because of the Battle of Antietam that Lincoln gives his Emancipation Proclamation. You can see, remember what I said before, the Emancipation was given in September of 1862. This is the day of this battle, September 17th, 1862. The one you want to know about the Mississippi is the Siege of Vicksburg, Mississippi, in July of 1863, fought because of the location of the Mississippi River, because we wanted control of the Mississippi River. Lincoln decides to make Ulysses S. Grant the commanding general of the U.S. Army here. Union victory, 10,000 soldiers to 9,000 soldiers casualties. Remember your turning point. The turning point is the big one. It's a 3-day battle where over 50,000 casualties happen. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the turning point. It's the last time Robert E. Lee tried to attack the North. It was 3 days. Lee got there first. Cavalry General Buford for the Union Army held off the Army of Virginia for a couple hours until nighttime. One of the highest ranking generals in the war at the time, Major General John Reynolds, dies on the first day at Gettysburg after getting shot in the neck. The second day, with Little Round Top and the wheat field, are the most fierce battles, trying to protect that hill. Places like Devil's Den or the Slaughter's Pen were down there. And day 3, remember day 3, Pickett's Charge. Pickett's Charge is one of the most important military blunders in our history. Robert E. Lee makes that tactical error and takes General George Pickett and 13,000 soldiers, march across that wide open field that I talked about in the video, over a mile long, 30, 40 minutes maybe of getting bombarded by cannons and Union musket shot. And you can see that over 50,000 guys die that day. Okay, so that's your turning point, Gettysburg. After that, Lee is kind of on the run. Till April 9th, 1865, we're going to call this the final battle of the Civil War. Final battle. Remember, it's not technically the final battle, but we call it the final battle because this is where Robert E. Lee surrenders the largest faction of the Confederate Army, or the Army of Virginia, to Ulysses S. Grant and the Army of the Potomac, led by George Meade. Union victory in the battle at Appomattox Courthouse. Look, remember, it was a small battle. Only 152 Union soldiers compared to 500 Confederate soldiers are considered to be casualties. So remember, Appomattox Courthouse is the final battle of the Civil War. But like I said, it wasn't technically the last battle, because the battles of North Carolina happened. One of those battles happened in our backyard in March of 1865, the Battle of Bentonville between Joseph Johnston and General William T. Sherman. They fight throughout North Carolina, starting in Bentonville to Goldsboro, up to Raleigh, and through Durham. And finally, General Johnson, surrenders his Confederate troops April 26, 1865, which was 17 days after the surrender of the Confederate Army of Robert E. Lee to Ulysses S. Grant. So remember, the Battle of Bentonville fought right outside, right in the backyard. It's one of the last significant battles. You can see that there were over 4,000 casualties in that battle. It was a Union victory towards the end of the war. The Union was just winning every battle. Okay, so there we go. We went through some causes of the wars, some disadvantages and some advantages of the North and the South, and some important battles of the Civil War. Any questions, please feel free to ask. Good luck on your test.